Too close to you.
Namaste and welcome. My name is Sham and I'll be your host for this afternoon's Fireside. The question for today's Fireside is, can nuclear energy contribute to Britain's sustainable future? To give you an outline of this evening's format, the Fireside is 45 minutes, consisting of 30 minutes discussion with our expert speaker and 15 minutes Q&A from you, the audience. Please interact with us on the YouTube chat, pose your questions, and I'll do my very best to get through as many of these as possible. Now, introducing our expert speaker, Professor Nawal Prinja. Hello and welcome, Nawalji. Namaste. Nawalji has 40 years experience in aerospace, automotive, oil and gas, and nuclear energy. As well as being the author of 48 publications, Nawalji is an advisory to the UK government on the nuclear energy strategy. Before beginning our discussion, I will introduce the topic. Energy is key in our lives. We use it in everything we do, everywhere we go, from switching on the light to driving the car, to watching this fireside discussion. Unfortunately, in most cases, our actions have a negative footprint on the environment. In June 2019, the government committed to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2050, while remaining committed to growing the economy. The energy we use can be produced in multiple ways, including coal, gas, biomass, renewable, and nuclear energy. So the question is, how can Britain sustainably meet its 2050 commitment? And is nuclear energy the answer? Well, we've got Nawalji here today with us. Nawalji, let's dive straight in. Can you start today by telling us and giving us an understanding of what nuclear energy is?
Okay, yes, thank you. There are two aspects of nuclear energy. We can produce energy by either splitting an atom or fusing an atom. We call it fission or fusion. And a very simple and quick way to understand this is when scientists discovered this fundamental principle in nuclear physics, that imagine you were carrying your shopping bag, a weightless bag containing 4 potatoes. Each one weighed 10 grams each. So your total bag is 40 grams. If somehow you split the bag and all these potatoes fall around and you weigh them, for strange reason, they do not weigh 10 grams each anymore. They will be less. And it happens when you split an atom. The parts together do not weigh as much as when they weighed when they were together. Okay? Separately, their weight is lost. Where does that mass disappear? And that is where comes, without any mathematics, E equals mc squared. That lost mass gets converted into energy. And c is the speed of light, which is a large number. So you can imagine tiny, tiny fraction of mass disappearing, giving you massive amount of energy. So when you split an atom, you get that energy, and along with it, some radiation, alpha, beta, gamma rays, which is where the dangerous part comes. And the reverse is when you fuse 2 atoms together, the same thing happens. Separately, what they weigh, when they come together, somehow the mass reduces. So again, you lose a mass, which creates energy. So fission and fusion, these are the 2 ways scientists have been creating energy. The sad part, of course, is before this atomic energy was discovered, they had a sadder part to it, and that was the atomic weapon. So the foundations of what we call civil nuclear power generation were actually laid, sadly, during the World War by the atomic weapons. Because of course, when you split an atom, you can start a chain reaction, and if this chain reaction is very, very rapid, it will just explode and give a massive, massive explosion. But I am very happy to talk about the civil nuclear part of energy, because this aspect of science, the peaceful use of atoms, started literally the day I was born. So civil nuclear power is as old as I am.
Brilliant. So you've definitely invested your life in this technology. So,
Yes.
and just to make it clear for our audience, we've got fission and fusion. So it's the fission energy which you've mostly dealt with for that amount of time, and then the fusion is the technology which is the more up and coming. Is that correct?
True, it is up and coming. And by the way, I mean, there are several tokamaks around the world. These are the machines where they are fusing hydrogen atoms together. The biggest one is in Oxford. It's called the JET. And every other day that machine, does the fusion. The only problem is the amount of energy you put in to fuse is the amount of energy you get back. But I have been working on it. I actually sit on UK government's Fusion Advisory Board. And so UK government is committed to fusion energy as well. We are part of this international consortium that is building world's biggest fusion reactor in France near Aix-en-Provence. This is an international effort. China, India, Japan, South Korea, Russia, America, an entire European Union. Yeah, it's a massive project. It's the most complex machine being made by mankind. And only 2 weeks ago, French president formally started the assembly process of this machine. And I sit on the technical assessment panel. So yeah, I've spent quite some time. But just for your viewers, some interesting facts about it. This is like building little sun on Earth. When you fuse these atoms together, you create a plasma. The temperature of this plasma is going to be 135 million degrees centigrade, 5 times hotter than the sun. And
wow.
It's going to be kept, it's going to be kept swimming around in a donut-shaped vessel. It can't touch anything because it is so hot, and it's in vacuum. It just swims around this plasma, and it is going to be kept in that position by very powerful magnets. The magnets that are being used in this power plant are so powerful that they can actually suck an aircraft carrier out of the sea.
Wow, the technology seems immense. And that's a lot of energy in one place. And I guess that's the same with both fission and fusion. It's a lot of energy in one place. How many years would you say it is until we could have fusion more commercialized?
Okay, so currently it is only an experiment. So this assembly will go on for a few more years. In about 3 to 4 years' time, there will be a big news. And I think when you hear that news, you will remember this interview. That is when the world will wake up that, yes, from fusion, we can get more power than what we can put in. So this French reactor, it's going to be giving back about 10 times the power we put in, just using hydrogen atoms. And it is very safe because it does not create, it doesn't melt down. It will not suffer from any of those accident scenarios. It's a very safe, very, very clean form of energy. So after that experiment is done, to turn it into commercial I guess another 5, 10, 15 years. It depends on how quickly governments want to take it up.
So do you think this could be a real technology which is part of the 2050 target?
Absolutely, yes. So you know that UK government is, UK, I mean, I'm very proud of it, is the first developed country in the world which actually legalized, there is a law which forces all governments to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. First country.
Brilliant, brilliant. I think that moves us nicely into, can you give us an update onto where UK's policy is on energy and more specifically nuclear energy?
Okay, so to understand the policy, you have to see where is this carbon coming from, okay? So in UK, typically we produce about 460 million tons of carbon. So keeping in mind that about there are 60 million of us, so each one of us every year produces 7 tons of carbon. It's reducing, by the way. At the peak of industrialization, when everything was burning coal and gas, it was very high. We have already reduced down nearly 30%. So we are heading that way. The biggest sort of source is energy production and transportation. Those are the two very, very big causes. And within energy production, nearly 40% of it is coal, gas, fossil fuels. So our idea is that nuclear power should replace, not all of it, but most of it. And I will come to the role that nuclear power can play in this sustainability to reduce the carbon output. So the main role for nuclear, I mean, people will immediately jump on me and say, oh, what about wind and solar and hydropower and so on? Yes, the problem you have to really understand when you talk about carbon production is whole life cycle. So people talk about cars running on batteries and say, look, there is no carbon being produced when I run my car. But what about the carbon that was produced when they were making the battery?
Of course, yes.
So these battery run cars are actually not carbon free. Yeah. So if you look at the whole life cycle from beginning to end, you will find that nuclear has the lowest carbon footprint.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So two things. One, the first thing, just coming back to what you've just said. So you'd like nuclear to replace most of what we now produce from coal and oil and gas. So is the government in support of this, or is there?
Yeah, in UK, the coal powered stations are almost gone. That is what has led to this massive reduction in the carbon that UK is claiming now. And the gas will go out soon, hopefully, and also transportation as we more towards electrification of cars and trucks and so on. So it is possible, the technology is there. It is possible that by 2050, and almost all political parties, Labour, Tory, doesn't matter who is in power, they have all, over the years, have supported this policy. The reason why nuclear must play an important role is reliability. You can, of course, put solar panels on your ceiling. By the way, solar panels, and let me give you a bit of a data here so people can, it's not just the emotion, it's a fact-based. Typically, to have, say, 1 kilowatt hour of energy. So a kilowatt is like, when you run your a hair dryer or maybe a heater or microwave. Yeah, for 1 hour, it will burn 1 kilowatt hour, typically. And coal and gas will produce about 800 grams of carbon to give you that energy. Nuclear, just about 10 grams, 80 times less, over whole life period, mind you. Yeah. Solar panels, you may just imagine, oh, it's only the sun, but the making of those panels and everything else will take about 30 to 40 grams to produce that kilowatt hour. So solar panel is more polluting than the nuclear power. The only power source that comes anywhere near 10 grams is wind. But the problem is when you have high pressure, when there is no wind, there is no power. And you can't do that. You know, the power consumption has to be reliable. So our government's policy, and we are very much in it, is in this energy mix, nuclear power should be there to provide what we call the base load. You know, a steady load that you need, come what may, whatever weather conditions there are, you have this steady base load. So that's the role of nuclear power.
Yeah, it's brilliant. You've answered some of the questions I was going to ask you, and I was going to highlight the wind life cycle emissions as well. And another point to that is half of our nuclear capacity is due to retire maybe in the next 5 years. How do we plan to replace this? So when we're not only just talking about expanding and replacing the carbon energy sources such as coal, oil, and gas, but now we've also got to replace what we're currently retiring. How do we do this?
So the idea behind that is the current nuclear power stations we talk about are what we call gigawatt power stations. You know, they produce thousands of, but they take years to build and they take a lot of money, about 18 to 20 billion pounds. Yeah. Hinkley Point C is the latest one, which is being constructed. So the future idea is not to build such big ones, but small ones, where you don't go to the site and, you know, send thousands of workers to the site to, no. You build these small devices in a factory, you put them on the back of a truck, and you take them in a safe place. These are called small modular reactors. So UK government has announced that. We are working away on it. Rolls-Royce is leading this project with other companies, including mine. So that is, and they are much safer, more compact. There is less amount of radioactivity, less amount of waste, less amount of hazards which can trouble these reactors. But at the same time, we are also looking at, currently we are talking about third generation of power stations. We are already thinking about the fourth generation. So a UK government very recently, literally months ago, announced, after looking at 8 different designs, they have picked up 3 designs of what we call advanced modular reactors. These are generation 4, very, very safe, absolutely clean. You know, if everything goes wrong with it, fine, they will just sit there, do nothing. So there are no, you know, serious accidents or core meltdowns, reactor meltdown, nothing of that sort. So those generation 4 reactors, 3 designs are being worked at. One of them is, of course, fusion, and the other 2 are the fission.
Sure. And you spoke about Hinkley Point C. I believe there's an expected cost of about 22 billion pounds. Now, having the smaller modulated reactors, does that then mitigate this initial big capital cost?
Absolutely. You know, people ask me, why does it cost so much? And we did a study, a government group did a study to find out the cost of building a nuclear power station. And guess which was the most expensive part? Not the land, not the equipment, not the buildings. It was cost of money. 30% of that cost is cost of money. Reason? It takes long time, you know, it takes years to build, and then you do not know what the price of electricity is going to be like. So which bank is going to give you that loan against so many unknowns, So the cost of borrowing money is massive. But if you bring the cost down, you don't have to borrow it, you can afford it within your, and you build a small reactor, you run it, you make some money, then with that money, you build another one. So you can have family of these smaller reactors. So financial model or the commercial model becomes attractive.
Interesting. So from what you're saying, it sounds like soon many of our listeners will have small nuclear modulated reactors more local to them than maybe what they would have now, because there'll be more of them.
Well, believe me, this is another myth I want to abolish. When you go to hospitals, you have your x-rays. Where is that x-ray machine located? Right in the middle of the hospital. Okay, some precautions are taken, but it is there right in the middle. When you go to your dentist, he zaps you with x-rays. Where is that machine? So we are already used to living pretty close to radioactivity, okay, provided you take care. So one of those projects that I just mentioned, Generation 4, the 3 reactors, one of them is uranium battery. It is literally a nuclear battery. It can sit in the basement of a massive big building. So, like in London, you have all those, and sit there safely, you fuel it once, and it will give you steady power for the next 35 to 40 years. By the way, at this point, I can mention, because I do work with the Ministry of Defense, I look after or work on the Science and Technology Advisory Group on the nuclear submarines. It's a public knowledge, so I can share it with you, that the latest nuclear submarines have nuclear reactors which can keep on working for 35 years. So you can sit in a submarine, go underwater and live there for 35 years. And that energy will make your oxygen, your electricity, clean your water. The only limit is, of course, human endurance. You want to come back home.
Sure. No, that's interesting. And it does, for reliability, it really, from what you're saying, nuclear seems to be the answer. Just to help our audience and the public a little bit more, there has been disasters in the past. I mean, you mentioned that meltdown would not be possible with fusion, but what about fission, and what about these small modulated reactors? Is that possible?
There have only been 3 major nuclear disasters: 3 Mile Island in USA, Chernobyl in Russia, and Fukushima in Japan. And again, I know people have their own vision and versions of what actually happened. The 3 Mile Island, it was the technicians were not well trained. It was not the fault of the technology. It was technology in the hands of wrong people or badly trained people. At Chernobyl, later on it emerged, Russians were messing around with that reactor. They actually knew its limitation. Again, it was not fault of the technology, but it was just being abused at that time, and things went wrong. Okay, with Fukushima, there was an earthquake and the reactor did shut down along with the others. Okay, the sad problem was 3 hours after the reactor was shut down, the tsunami came. Okay, the flooding, and they flooded the generators which were providing the electricity to cool down the reactor. You know very well that whenever you switch off something hot, it doesn't cool down immediately, it takes time. So there was only about 2% of heat left, just 2%. And these diesel generators were cooling it, but sadly, the flooding came and it was massive. It was 1 in a million year event. It wasn't an everyday event, 1 in a million year. So just to make you feel comfortable, currently we are designing nuclear power stations And we have to ask ourselves a question: what if 1 in a million year or 1 in a 10 million year event takes place? That is the level of safety that we are going for.
Sure. So, and just to, so we did a poll with our audience or followers on social media, that part, and 30% said that low levels of CO2 produced by nuclear power does not mitigate or compensate for the risk. So I'm hoping what you just told us sort of reassures our audience. And I guess, are you saying the risk is nil or it's minimal?
We are heading where there is nothing known as zero, okay? It's impossible. But you have to compare. Whenever you use technology, you take risk. Automotive, yeah? Road traffic accidents leading to death in UK are perhaps the lowest in the world. We actually live in the safest country, yet there are about 1,000 to 2,000 deaths due to road traffic accidents in UK. Right?
Sure.
But we don't care. We sit in a car and still drive. Look at air traffic. Sadly, recently in India, there was, due to, every other day we hear some air, related deaths. Do we stop flying? So if you, mining, the miners, railways, in Croydon, you had a crash last year when that train toppled over and somebody died. So if you look at that and then ask yourself a question, how many nuclear-related deaths have taken place in UK?
Yeah, Nawalji, I guess there are two parts of risk, right? So you very much focused on talking about the likelihood. So we're saying the likelihood is very, very low. But yet, I guess I'm assuming our audience and the public are more concerned about the impact. Can you tell us a bit more about what could the impact be if such an event was to happen?
Okay, let's look at the nearest one was Fukushima in Japan. I can tell you the data is there because I was with International Atomic Energy Agency. Not a single death has taken place in public, due to radiation in Fukushima. Not a single death. But several deaths took place due to the event not related with radiation. And the reason was very elderly people were being moved from their homes. And that led to a lot of issues, medical issues and so on. So there you are. I mean, in Chernobyl also, they did 2 evacuations. And in fact, later studies showed that there was actually not that much of a need. So once you have taken precautions, including the very workers who worked in Chernobyl, they are still well and fine. So it's all, again, matter of course, when an accident takes place, you're not perhaps that prepared. But in nuclear industry, we pay a lot of attention to not only if an accident happens, but how will you manage it? Preparedness, emergency preparedness, one of the highest in any sector.
We've only got a few minutes left before we get into the Q&A section. So thank you for that. What I would like to do is then, when I've been researching about this, it seems that a lot of focus then becomes on waste. So I know there was a document which I was reading, or report I was reading, and it said 126,000 barrels of nuclear waste has been stored in a disused German mine. And this is currently a concern, as there is a risk of water contamination from the water that passes the mine. Is disposing of nuclear waste still of a concern? And if so, how do engineers manage it?
Okay, let me just tell you that most of the dangerous waste we are talking about, like UK has, again, it's well known, over 100 tons of plutonium. Yeah, but most of that waste was generated during the Cold War. I mentioned to you right at the beginning that sadly the birth or the foundations of civil nuclear power was laid by the military use. So a lot of the waste that we are having to deal with is the legacy waste. Yeah, the modern nuclear power stations, particularly generation 3 or generation 4, the best place for radiation is to get burned within the reactor. You don't want that radiation to carry on in your waste. So the new designs pay a lot of attention. There is a lot of burn up done within the reactor. And it is okay, a small amount of waste will come, like any other industry, chemical industry, process industry, and so on. And it is safe, provided you put them in encapsulated containers and put them away underground with no risk of water contamination or any other contamination. And by the way, there is a lot of natural radiation from the ground anyway due to radon gas and others. So it will not enhance in any way. But you do have a point that we have ended up with a lot of legacy waste to deal with, but that was the doing of the military use of the technology.
Okay, now that's interesting, and it becomes a little bit more reassuring. And we've got our first question that's come in. And it's come from Shanel. Is nuclear energy or fission and fusion, is it infinite? Is our resource infinite?
Okay, fission relies on, clearly, because when you want to break an atom, you want big atoms like uranium, plutonium with over 235 protons. You can imagine bigger bag is easy to split than a small bag, okay? If you put, but that kind of a material is pretty rare. So overall, uranium supply, there are only few countries who have it. India has a lot of thorium in its beach sands, but the natural resource is limited. It will take maybe 40, 50 years before it, we start to worry about it. But fusion, as I mentioned to you earlier, we only fuse hydrogen, yeah, or the tritium and deuterium, which are radioisotopes of hydrogen. And there's plenty of them around. There's so much of it around. Just a cup of water has enough hydrogen in it to run a whole city for a year. So yes, fusion, if it gets going, almost infinite.
Okay, now that's interesting. And the next question we had actually from Dishita, and I think you've answered a bit of it, is how sustainable is relying on nuclear energy over the next 100 years for the UK?
I would say not only 100, but for millions of years to come. And Rishita, please remember, for the last 800,000 years, the carbon levels were below 300 parts per million. Part per million is 1 milligram in a kilogram is called 1 part per million. Yeah. So carbon, and I'm not talking about just last 100, 10 or 100 or 1,000, 800,000 years. Scientists have found air trapped in the icebergs, which are as old as, so that's how they got this data, has been always below 300 parts per million. But last year, we broke that limit. Yeah, due to industrialization, this limit shot up, not just tiny amount, it has gone to 400.
Wow.
Never ever in the last 800 years, we have had such concentration of carbon, okay? And it is increasing. And what legacy are we going to leave behind for our children if we keep burning gas and coal, fossil fuels for energy? So, yeah. My own grandchildren, that's why I work 18 hours a day, because philosophically, I somehow feel that this technology breakthrough is needed. Otherwise, we have no choice.
Sure. No, thank you for that. We've just got another question. It's come from Gaurang, and he's asked another aspect to maybe the negative impact of nuclear energy. He said, if exposed to radioactive radiation, could this lead to cancer and the deterioration of the environment?
Yes. By the way, I mean, radiation is not always bad. Please remember this. You know that a lot of cancers are actually treated by radiotherapy. And X-rays are used to detect what's going on in. So, it is also used during COVID-19 to clean up surfaces and materials, bandages, and so on. So, please don't think that it is a poison. It is not. But of course, you have to be very careful when you use it. With knowledge, with technology, these things can be used carefully. So yeah, if you expose yourself to too much of radiation, it can cause damage to health. Yes, that is known. But be aware. I mean, sometimes we just take too much of, we get scared. I think your readers or listeners may not know, but when you go on your holidays and you take a flight and you're flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet up in the air, your body is soaking up radiation. Yeah,
Sure.
more than what you will soak up living like next to a nuclear power station.
Sure. Uh, Thank you. And we've got a question from Hari, and he's asked, does the existence of nuclear power plants and maybe the modular reactors as well, so I'll bring that in, does it become a terror risk? Could it lead to something happening because they could be targets?
Yeah. So yes, they are anti-terrorist measures. We call them ATM to be taken. But as you go smaller, it becomes much more difficult for anyone to get at it. Not only that, but these generation 4 reactors that I was talking about are going to use the fuel, which are so safe that if you really want to get the nasty things out, most probably you will be dead before you could do anything with it, because they are so hard, to be turned into anything nasty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've got another question from Sachin, and he said, it sounds like nuclear energy is key for our eco and our energy problems. But why is it then not openly embraced by our governments? I think we've got Germany, Spain, and even maybe Scotland who are looking to phase it out. Why is this?
Okay, these governments that you have quoted are democratically elected governments where the public opinion matters. So sadly, it is the public opinion which is dictating the policies. Not in UK. UK governments have used the what is called the fact-based policy making, but many others like Germany ruled by the Green Party's policies. But again, people are influenced by the perception of the risk, not the real risk. I've already given you the example of accidents in railways and aerospace and automotive industry. Those industry sectors, people can accept that risk, but not the nuclear because of lack of understanding or lack of knowledge. But if that risk is understood, you will realize that, for example, other governments, Indian government, Chinese government, they see that the only way forward is to let civil nuclear use. Like China is building dozens of new nuclear power stations, and so is India. And by the way, I'm more closer to the Indian nuclear industry. I live near Manchester, and the birthplace of Indian nuclear industry is Manchester.
Sure. Just to follow up on that, should public opinion lead policy or science and research?
Science and research, absolutely. But of course, public need to be informed. Particularly in democratically elected governments, where there is freedom and democracy, I think people need to be informed, and then the opinions should be taken forward.
Sure. Okay. No, thank you for that. Time has flown, and we have come to the end of the Q&A. I've really enjoyed this, Noel G. Thank you. It's been a great month then. and you've made some really insightful points. For your closing remark, I would like to finish today's discussion by considering nuclear energy using a dharmic framework of heat and meet. Heat meaning beneficial to many people as possible, and meet meaning minimizing harm or conflict as much as possible. So Nawalji, to close today's fireside, how can nuclear energy play a part in a sustainable future considering the framework of Dharma I've just presented?
Yes, most of my actions are actually dictated by the Dharma that I have understood from study of the Vedas and Upanishads, and particularly Gita. In third chapter of it, Lord Krishna actually says, perform right action. Yeah, action is superior to inaction. Without action, you cannot even sustain your own body. You have to breathe, and every time you breathe, you produce carbon. So relevant. So in that case, they say then you have to perform an action such that you do not leave behind a legacy for the future generations. He goes on to explain, the dharmic definition of what is karma, the action, who is the doer of that action, and what will be the fruit of that action. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be ugly, So I am very, very much dictated that we all have to live. We all need energy. We all need to be educated. We want good health care. I'm not saying stop using energy, but be mindful of how are you producing that energy. Not by burning fossil fuels, depleting natural resources, but using your knowledge, understanding the laws of nature. And that is again Dharma. Dharma is nothing but laws of nature. Understand it, keep on acting, keep on researching, and then make sure that it is of the benefit, upliftment. Dharma is the one which uplifts you. So that is how I see Dharma interacting with science and technology and producing sustainable future for all of us.
Thank you, Nawalji. Well, if we are bringing the sun to the planet or to the earth with fusion, we will definitely be doing that. So thank you very much, Nawalji. I've really learned a lot from our discussion today, and it has been great to have you on our platform. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching today's Fireside and for all of your engagement. I hope the discussion has given you a better insight into why energy is so important to us and understand what role nuclear energy could play in fulfilling our energy needs in a sustainable way. Your attendance, and especially our well wishes, allows us to continue our work and put on events like this. If you'd like to become a well wisher for Vichar Manthan, then please find the link below. We also have multiple book clubs hosted across the country. These are currently running virtually, so if you want to get involved, do not hesitate to contact us. So now we have our next Vichar Manthan or next event in 2 weeks' time. So join us then on the 3rd of September at 7 p.m. The topic is mental health, the dharmic perspective. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and namaste.